So are you going to all freak out if I get off the stage and come talk to you? So any of you who want to, we have a lot of empty seats over here, and then we can become more intimate in these two sections. So I'm going to mess up the cameraman. We're here to talk about a topic that is really dear to my heart, and but more importantly, there's a way in which many of us and the story of our lives become part of history. And you don't know it until you go to those museums they do, It doesn't matter what the museum is. All of a sudden, you go and you realize that 3/4 of the museum is your whole life, okay? And this is what happens. Now, I want to contextualize this a little bit, but it might help me if I knew who you were. So can we just do something for a minute? How many of you are actually from industry, like you work in an industry job? Can you raise your hand? Okay, so we can look around saying not too many of us, okay? So you guys are going to have to be the voice, yeah? Okay, how many of you are like professor types or you get paid by the universities? All right, okay. How many of you are students? Okay, how many of you didn't raise your hand? What are you? You're going to have to tell me what you guys do. All right, so now we know, kind of who we're talking to. And now we have to ask something much more important than that. How many of you are over 60? And so you're going to know what I'm talking about, and they're not, okay? Because you didn't live through it the way that we did. Now, what am I talking about? And it's important for you to understand that there's a difference in what's going on with women worldwide, okay, now than there was back in the days when I was a young woman. So if we roll back to, so remember, I'm from the US, yes? I'm already global, right? And not only am I global, but I have one foot in a kind of academic background and one foot in industry, so I'm the living bridge, okay? I've been the living bridge for a long time. Now, the first women's movement that we remember and that we think about are the suffragettes, yes? You know who the suffragettes are? Okay. Now, they had one main issue. What was it? Vote. All right, now I want you to understand, and I want you to see the difference between having a tangible issue and an intangible issue, right? So, voting, you either vote or you don't vote, yes? So we can march and legislate and lobby and threaten not to have sex with our husbands and all that stuff, right? In order to get the vote. But it's a very tangible thing, and that makes it easy. Now, in the second wave women's movement, that's my time, yeah? At least that's what the third wave people say to me. You're in the second wave women's movement. We had an issue also, because now this issue is starting, in the 1945, in 1950. Do you know what the second wave women's movement issue was? No. Work. Let's start with the basics. Work. Okay, so we can measure that too, right? Women are either working or they're not working. So today, 47% of the US workforce is women. So we're working. Yeah? All right, now let's roll forward into the third wave women's movement. And I'm so happy to announce, I was told this the other day, that we are in now the post-third wave women's movement, where they're coming back to my ideas. So that sounds good to me. So in what we're dealing with today, when we talk about things, sure, we could do equal pay. That's at least measurable, lobby, Iceland just did something cool I tweeted about, right? So to guarantee that women are going to be equal pay. But that is measurable. But the issues for women in technology, they have nothing to do with anything measurable. They have nothing to do with anything tangible. And so the stuff we're dealing with today is way, way harder. Okay? Because if we could legislate, I don't know, what are we going to legislate? Being nice? by whose definition, in what country, in what culture, in what company. I mean, really, let's be realistic. I think if you can go home and be nice in your own family all of the time, then you can talk about being nice, okay? All right, so what's really going on here, and why am I doing this? So I've been working in technology industry for 30 years. And that means that not only was I one of the early people in HCI, just as a human being. I mean, there was no field when I came in. There was no UX, there was hardly user research, there was no interaction design, there was no visual design, there were no programs, there were no degrees, there were nothing. It was all psychologists, and anybody that got on the bandwagon was like in CS, okay? Was a man and in computer science. So when I came into the field, what did the world look like? Well, there were 10 smart men in a room, and they said, this is cool technology, because this was at the time of green screens. Yes, we know what a green screen is. Young people, you know what a green screen is? Have you seen one of these things? Okay. So there is no interface. And they'd say, we're going to build this. And they'd throw it over the wall to marketing, and marketing would say, what is it? Who needs it? What's it for? And they say, we like it, go build it, goodbye. Okay? So that's engineering-driven design. Yes, there was no user-centered design. There was no idea of users. There was no participatory nothing. Like, no. None of, nah. So that's the world that I walked into. So roll forward 30 years and we have a whole lot of people. All right, so I've always worked with young people of any gender. And about 8 years ago, I always talk to young women would come to me and they'd say, Karen, how do you walk into a room full of men? And I was like, what? And then they'd start crying. And then at the Chi conference, we'd get other young people together. We had this women's breakfast, which turned into everything that starts as gender has to turn into diversity. So it went from the women's breakfast to the diversity lunch. And so we started getting people together in tables. Oh, by the way, if you haven't figured it out, I'm very irreverent. Yes, you know what the word irreverent means? I don't do anything that everybody thinks is okay. Irreverent. Learn a new word. And now we had whole tables of women crying. And I'm like, didn't I do this 25 years ago? What is going on? All right, so I want to talk about what is going on and why I switched my energy. After all, we have a whole field of user-centered design. I might as well do something else, yeah? What's the problem? So let's think about it. Now, started the women's movement, second wave. And our question was, let's work, yes? All right, so now we look at the statistics on women working, and it all goes up and 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 up. Okay, now what are we measuring? We're measuring what we call hero industry. A hero industry is where everybody works too hard all the time like crazy people. Okay, so that's doctors, lawyers, iBankers, business, technology. Yeah? You know who I'm talking about now? I can see none of you are doing simultaneous translation, so if you don't know what I'm talking about, you ever tell me. All right, so now what happens? So we're talking about the 70s, and so from the 70s we go up in all these hero industries, up and up and up. If we continue today, for any field except technology, it goes up and up and up. And then we have us. And we go up and flat and down. And that is the only industry where this is happening. So it's our problem. And then I find out that we've spent, since the late 70s, the early 80s, doing what we call pipeline. So pipeline is how do we get women into STEM or technology. So we need to understand, okay, you need to have a little context here. These issues of gender bias and women getting in and getting more women into the field, we've been doing this for 40 years or more. There are endless programs on young girls and making them happy to do science, and the high schools for STEM, and the programs that every company has had since the beginning of this time in the second wave women's movement to get women in the door. This is all good, but we have to recognize that this has been happening for a very long time. And what else has been happening for a very long time? Yes, they addressed homework balance. Yes, we had job sharing. Yes, we had daycare on the campus. Yes, we did all this stuff. This has been going on for 45 years. Yes, we did assertiveness training. Yes, we had bias workshops. Yes, we've been doing networking for over 45 years. So we need to understand when I tell you this next statistic, that all this stuff has been happening, and yet our numbers flatten and decline. So there's an old quality way of thinking, and it goes like this. If you're pouring water into a bucket, so we can see all of our pipeline, and we say, because, you know, the idea of women leaders is like a new thing, like Sheryl Sandberg invented it out of raw cloth, okay? And now we're going to all of a sudden count leaders. I want you to understand there's some basic statistics here. If you pour women into the corporate bucket and 50% more women leave the field, okay, now they're leaving the field. 50% more women leave the field than men. The women are falling out of the hole in the bucket. Yes, do you understand? So when we talk about women leaders, the math is never going to work, because not everyone wants to be a leader. Only a small percent of people want to be a leader. So if you have 500 men and you say, what, 10%, you'll get a certain number of leaders. But even if you anyway, which we didn't, started with 500 women and we lost half of the women, how many leaders will we get? You can't do the math. So you see the hole in that bucket? We call that retention. What does that mean? We want to make sure they don't leave. Because if you keep pouring women into the bucket and they keep falling out of the hole in the bucket, what is the point? And given that we've been pouring them in for 45 years, we must have a pretty big hole, okay? And so when I started looking at these numbers and I had all these crying women, right? I was like, isn't anyone, like, really? What's going on? Now, if you know me, you know that as soon as I ask that question, what's going on, it's a problem. Because if I ask it, then I have to go answer it, yeah? And so when I was doing a stint when I was at Stanford, and it was a time where nothing was funded and it was a downturn and everything. And so I said, well, it's time for us to do a deep dive to understand what's going on with women in technology companies, because it turns out that no one does it at all. And I went and asked everybody, and we searched endlessly, and no. Nobody is studying what women's lives are like inside of technology companies to understand what keeps them. Now, it's important for you to understand that I did not ask the question, why do women leave? No. I did not study first women who left the field. Because if you want to do something about retention, the first thing you have to do is find out why they stay. Because if you don't know why they stay, you cannot listen to the stories of the women who leave and find out if they're leaving for the reasons that others are staying. Yes? Because in the end, when we leave a situation, we don't really know why we are doing what we're doing, any more than users. This is very contextual design, right? Any more than users know what they want in a product. You can't go ask them and they can't tell you. So if you go ask women, why'd you leave? They're going to tell you some horrible story and how they're hurt and upset and whatever, and that's what you get. But that doesn't tell me what's going on. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay, so we start by asking, why do women stay? And out of that research, we found the key themes, and we have called this the at-work experience framework. And from that, we used our qualitative data in order to create a measure, in order to measure those experiences that women have at work so that we can find out whether or not we can differentiate healthy and unhealthy or supportive and unsupportive cultures. And Nicole and I collaborate on the measure. And all of the work that I'm going to talk to you about today has been done with collaborations worldwide with colleagues of mine and with virtually no funding up until this moment in time. Yeah? Okay? So what I'm here to talk to you about today is the at-work experience framework so that you can understand. And yes, when we did interview women who left, or in the course of talking to women about their experience at work who are staying, of course, everybody who stays left something, right? So you still get those experiences woven into. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is a kind of brief whirlwind tour of the factors that keep women in technology jobs. Now, we didn't study academics, but many think that it applies. Yeah? And what Nicola wanted me to say is that, when do you think I'm ending this? 11:30? Is that right, or sooner?
20 past.
20 past? Okay, so you're going to have to ask me questions. I'll be around. Yeah? Okay, are you ready to go? Okay, here we go. So the sad news of our statistics is, depending on our study, anywhere from 40 to 50% of women are thinking of leaving their jobs. So if you think of the hole in the bucket, that's like half the women are going to leave your company. That costs companies $16 billion a year in replacement costs, okay? So anyway, it's a financial argument. Now, what's interesting to us when we did the statistics, if you look across our scales, you see the purple line? I'm a purple girl, okay? Those are the scores across the factors of the women who are leaving. So we already know that anybody who's thinking of leaving their job is having a very different experience at work than the people who are not thinking of leaving their job. So this measure, this particular measure, thinking of leaving your job, is a key measure to determine how we are doing, and we now know that we have the scales to measure them. So if that's the case, then we better understand what these factors are, yes? Here we go. These are the factors that I'm going to talk to you about. First one, women love being in a tight, cohesive team up to something big, where they have dynamic exchanges and conversations, where they sometimes lead, where they sometimes follow, where they challenge and are challenged, where every day it feels like what you're doing is in a connected group of people getting stuff done. There is nothing more important than this. And if you listen to the next factors, you will see that the experience of team, the experience of being up to something together, is at the center of what help women thrive. Now, one might ask, but isn't that at the center of what help men thrive? And the answer would be yes. And we know that, because if you know men, and I know a lot of men, if they lose their key buddies when their company's bought or something like that, right, they get all depressed and they go home and they whine to their wives and spouses and what have you about it, and then they eventually follow all their buddies to the next job, yes? So you may not know that, but that's what's going on. You basically have little cliques that run around doing things together. But what's the difference? If a man walks into a team and it's all men, they just go, hi, what's happening, blah, blah, you know? And if a woman walks into a team and it's all men, it's not the same. It's just not the same. So the experience, we might say, of existential alienation is actually at the core of what's going on, right? The sense of belonging, the sense of value. It all happens on the ground, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, in the dynamic interaction with the people that you work with every day. That is what matters. Got it? Ready? Go. What's up to something big? This is really a disclaimer slide, because there's nothing I hate more than the idea of pink UIs. Do you know what I'm talking about? Women, oh, we need a mode for women. Oh, you know, women can't do things this, they're not interested in the same stuff. Oh, you know, everything needs to be socially relevant. If it was just socially relevant, women would come and they, all right, you see the low bar in the middle? That's socially relevant, okay? So can we please get over this? Okay, done. Why, what kind of projects do women think are interesting and terrific? Is it on the bleeding edge of technology? One woman who's a senior coder, you know, one of those, you know how you get to be the top person in an individual contributor, and I'm blocking on the name of it. She came up to me, she said, "Thank you, Karen. I'm so sick of the idea of women's topics. I just want to do cool tech. Thank you for making it okay for me to want to do cool tech." They care about things that are influential. They care about if it's influential in the industry, if it's new technology, if it's influential in the company. They care if it reminds them of their childhood, if, you know, it's working on something they played with as a kid, or, you know, stuff like that. They care about whether or not it's impactful. In other words, they care about the same stuff that men care about. And over and out. So can we stop talking about that, please? All right. All right, now, ladies, now you may not like this one, okay? But whether you like it or not, it's true. So, as far as I can tell, for a zillion years, we have data that says women have lower self-esteem than men, okay? So this is endless. And when we collect our data, our qualitative data, what we have are many walls that are filled with women going, "Oh, I don't think I'm not good enough. Oh, you know, there's a promotion out there. It's got 10 criteria. I only have 3. And the men are not, they're cheating. It's not fair. They apply for the job when they don't have all the criteria." Women, I don't know if this is some hubris, I don't know, humble or I don't know what it is, but they're reluctant to push themselves forward into a challenge, at least a good number of them. In other words, women who do well, we find, are what we call thrown into the ring. Somebody tosses them into a challenge. But this is called the push, there it is, right? And support. Because the push without support is really bad. So what do I mean by that? Sometimes the push comes from a professor at school who says, "You can do this really hard problem," right? But then, if they receive nobody to talk to and nobody to think strategically about it, and they feel like they're out on a lifeboat alone, then they don't succeed. One young woman, she was an African-American woman, she mentioned to her husband that maybe she would like to be a manager. But she didn't do anything. So he found the job, and she said, "No, I can't apply for that." And then he made her apply. You know how men make us do stuff. They sit next to us until we do it, okay? And then she applied, but it was closed. And then he said, "But you know that person, call them." "Oh, I can't call. No, I can't." And then he made her call him, and then she got the job. That's called the push from your family. For me, I wanted to do, in undergraduate school, I wanted to do a dissertation in my undergraduate. But I, didn't know anybody, and I was worried. I talked to this person. So my to-be husband, this is what he did. He said, you can do it. Then he walked me over to the psych building, and then he stood at the end of the aisle while I walked down to go talk to the professor. If you look at your own stories, you will probably find there's some pushes going on there. And these pushes can happen from your colleagues as well, because they throw you into the ring. But one woman who did leave the field, she graduated MIT, and they said to her, oh, you're a graduate of MIT, you can learn all of open source. This was her first job. And then she didn't know if she was doing it right, she didn't know really how to approach it, she didn't have anyone to talk to. And she'd go back to the manager and say, I don't know if I'm doing it right, like that, right? Which makes us look bad. Okay. And they would say to her, oh, but you're from MIT, and so. Ultimately, she was really isolated, right? Because they all believed in her so much, and nobody would talk to her. What does support look like? Support looks like strategizing together. Support doesn't have to come from the person who pushed. Right? Your teammate can push and other teammates can support. Your spouse can push, your manager can support. Your manager can push, your teammates can support. However it works out. We need the push and support. When I was at Chi 2 weeks ago, I give this talk a lot, and I say, and I don't have time for you to do this, but this is your task, okay? If you listen to me, you go home with homework. I want you to ask yourself, who should I be pushing and who should I be supporting? And I want you to write it down, and I want you to do it. Yes? Yes? Okay. So last week when I was there, this woman grabbed me. She said, Karen, I want to thank you. I'm like, what are you talking about? She said, I was in your audience when you gave that task. And she was an academic. And her professor turned to her and said, I am going to push and support you. And then 2 years later, she has a good job in academia. And she said if it wasn't for understanding about the push, she wouldn't be there. Yeah? Ready? Here we go. Local role models. Now, I don't know if you know who these guys are. Okay, that's Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She's a Supreme Court justice in the United States. If you haven't heard of the notorious RBG, go find out everything about her, okay? But most people would, go like this, RBG, oh my God, she's so important, right? Now, you know the guy in the middle, right? Yeah, Steve Jobs, yeah, we know him. All right, that's Ginny, I forget her last name. Anyway, she's the CEO of IBM, okay? So these are like, Nicola likes to talk to me like, oh, she's a luminary. I'm like, really? Okay, those are luminaries. Luminaries, like, do we say, oh, don't you see, RBG is a Supreme Court justice? She got married, she had 2 kids, and she changed the law for women. Oh my God. Do we just go, yeah, I could be RBG? Sure. Me and RBG, I met RBG a few years ago, and even though I'm walking in her office, I'm talking to the person. No, that was not a normal conversation. It was like, RBG. Too often, whether we're talking about Grace Hopper or other institutions like that, we trot out these great stories. The wondrous stories this happened at one conference I was at, of the young woman who was the manager and director of a section of the company while she had twins and wrote a children's book and is back to work today. Doesn't that just make you feel like you can do it too? All right, so stop. Stop trotting out all these important people. They are useless, and they do not encourage young people to think that they can do it too. It's only just scary. And that is not what they need. Our current research on onboarding and our past research on what is going on tells us that what young people need of all types, and women particularly, is what we call local role models or local buddies. Somebody in their company or their organization who has a year or 2 more experience than them and can be a guide to the company, and they can ask questions of them. What they need is a manager at that level who lives a life that looks sane. If you want them to be promoted, their life has to look sane. And if all they do, this is what the women tell us, if all they do is travel all the time and fire people and have to get involved in politics, they don't kind of think that's very appealing. And even this high-level director that I interviewed, who's the one who loved the bleeding-edge technology, she says, oh no, so she's already up there, right? She's a director or a VP or something. She's like, oh no, I won't do that next job. I said, why? Well, I could never see my children if I did that job. If the job doesn't look like you can have a real life, women don't want to be promoted. It's just that simple. So every person who has a little bit more experience than the woman you just hired in your company is a local role model. That means all of you are local role models. So I want to ask you, are you a good local role model? Men or women, we don't care what the gender is. Because if you don't live a life that looks appealing, and if you are not available to ask and answer questions, men and women, what women hate, by the way, more than anything is that they should be thought of as the mentor to all women for all time. You know, in the beginning, the only way people like me got raised was by the support of men. Men are the ones who have the power. Men are the ones who can break down the door. Men broke down the door in the second wave women's movement. Without male partners, things will happen much more slowly. Okay? So there's a very big job for you men. Okay? So local role models. Ready? So what about family? You know, you can't do these talks without talking about this. So I have to talk about it. It's pretty irrelevant. The longer we focus on homework balance as the reason that women leave IT, the more we will never get anything done. If we go back to those hero industries, we have shown over and over that homework balance issues are utterly irrelevant to why women are in or out of the workforce. Because all those other industries, they have just as horrible homework balance policies and situations of working too much as we do. And there are none of those women leaving. We're the only one leaving. We've been having this stuff go on, in the Scandinavia and all these European countries for however long, and none of that, the women still took more time than the men. You know, it's just not a point. It's just not relevant. We should all fight for it. This is something that we can fight for that is political, that is measurable, and it affects everyone, and it's not why women are leaving our field. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? I'm not saying it's not relevant. I'm saying it's not a determinant factor. So what could be important to women? It's about how their team and manager respond, because women start with these issues. Like if they have a kid and the kid is sick, they sneak out. I'm sneaking out because this is in their brain. I'm sneaking out because someone's going to notice that I left early. Or they're coming late. I'm sneaking in. Maybe no one will notice that This is their perception of the team's perception of them when nobody verbalized anything. Okay? So if the team and the manager instead offer flexibility, as one young woman told me, her manager, she's pregnant, said, goodbye, go home, we're going to handle it, your job's going to be here. Or one team said, look, just be home. We'll do remote. We're living in the world of remote today. We don't have to worry about all the things we had to worry about 30 years ago. When the team says, you're part of us, reel back to the power of a cohesive team. When the team says, we're with you, we need you, we're going to keep you hooked in, then the women stop listening to the blah, blah in their ear, right? Because this blah, blah in our ear gets us in more trouble than anything else. sometimes it's real. But if you're already buzzing, your ear is like got a earplug and it can't hear anything real because you're just listening to your inner voice. All of us who worked full-time in the second wave women's movement, who had children, had amazingly supportive spouses, had amazingly supportive environment. And that's what you have to build. Everybody has to build that. So, non-judgmental flexibility, that's what they need. But all that policy stuff, if you say, I will freeze your eggs so you don't have babies at the right time. If you say, I will pay for your nanny on the airplane, but I will make you still travel, you are not doing flexibility. So we need to understand that we need to focus on what's happening on the ground, in the team, every day, what is going on, and nobody is focusing on that. So what am I saying? This is a product development challenge. This is the challenge of whatever is happening, whatever your collaborators are at work every day of your life. It is not an HR challenge. It is not about having certain kinds of policies or laws. It's about everyday practice. And so when we think about our target inside of corporations for change, our target is changing core principles, changing daily practices, and stopping blaming personalities. Blaming personalities, blaming the woman, blaming the man, blaming whatever it is you want to blame because that's how it feels, but it's not what it's about. If you're going to the workshop Wednesday, I'm going to talk about some team practices and other practices that you can put in place. But what I have learned, I've been doing contextual design for 30 years. I've been working with product companies for 30 years, including those here in Germany, okay? And contextual design, if you're familiar with it, it's a very structured process. Everybody always knows what they're doing all the time. In 30 years, I've never had a gender issue. Because if you have a practice that is clear and articulate, everybody starts showing up like they know what they're doing and they get down to work. And women want that as much as men. Women want straight talk. Women want to know what is the process. Women want to know what are the deliverables. In our study, 50% of women do not know what to do to be successful. I want you to think about that for a minute. Do you think we can fix something like that? Like, this is a successful deliverable. This is how we do things. Here is your computer. These are the tools we use. HR thinks a lot about onboarding into the company, our mission, our values, and how to get your paycheck. There's virtually no planning for onboarding into the team. And so it's chaotic. And that's what our new work on onboarding is showing us. So we focus on practices. And if you change the practice, you change the business culture. If you change the business culture, people follow. You don't have to say to people, you all need to go to therapy for the next 25 years and get fixed. Because if we have been doing bias training, networking, and all the rest of this stuff for 40 years and no one's fixed yet, maybe we should stop pretending that this is going to happen. All we end up doing is blame and accusation. And every time you're doing blame and accusation, you already lost. You already lost. So if we target this, all that low self-esteem that women come in with, if we did all this stuff so that the environment sounded like what I'm talking to you about, then all women would start to feel valued, because of course you feel valued when you're connected and you're asked to do things and you have a local role model and someone to talk to and you're pushed into the hard things, yeah? Of course you feel valued because you're part of it. So really, we should think of things like self-esteem and the sense of confidence as a dependent variable. The problem is that at this moment in time, that's not what the world looks like. Yes? Do you understand? So there's a second target. Now, when I stand up in front of people most of the time and I say to them, you can ask any question of me. Mostly I only get questions about this. Because as human beings, we're only conscious of our inner experience. We do not see the organizational structure. We do not see the structure of the day. We do not see what would happen if we just had a formal critique process so that it wasn't like a free-for-all of yelling at each other. You know, put in a normal, formal critique process based on principles, and all of the angst of judgment would disappear. Very simple. Then you didn't have to be mad at anyone. That's what I mean by focusing on structure, not personalities. But what we have is this, and in our research, we build affinity diagram. We have whole walls that talk about I'm not good enough, I don't think I'm good enough. Anytime I should try something new, women go, so I need a new degree, right? This is the manifestation of not feeling good enough. Or we talk about another thing I despise right now is this conversation about the imposter syndrome. Okay? You know what imposter syndrome is, you guys? Yeah, okay. So now we're going to fix imposter syndrome. Another intrapsychic experience that we should fix. You want to know who I learned imposter syndrome from? Remember I talked to you about my husband standing with me when I went down the hall to that professor? Okay, that was a male professor. He was a new one. I walked down the hall, I walked into his office, we started talking, and he just said to me, you know, I just feel like an imposter here. This was my first introduction. I was an undergraduate. I said, what are you talking about? He said, I think the FBI are going to come and get me, that I'm not really worthy of how far I've come. That's how I learned about imposter syndrome, okay? So first of all, ladies, one of the things you have to know is men have feelings. They have tons of feelings. They have enormous self-esteem issues. They don't know if they're okay. They worry about whether they did a good job. They have all this stuff. Am I telling the truth, guys? Am I telling the truth? No, they're too scared to say yes. Look at that guy. He's not going to say yes. But what do? They go home to their significant others. And their significant others say, what are you talking about? You're wonderful and terrific. You're amazing. You're going to do it like that. I support you. We kiss them on 2 cheeks. We kick them out the door. Now they're back, okay? In the end, we have to remember that there's no big line between us and men. Men are just guys. You know, you can pretend you're me. I'm the first of 6 kids. The next 4 are boys. Okay? So I grew up with a male team, trying to babysit them, getting bloody noses. And, you know, when I look at men, all I just see is more brothers. You know, they're just brothers. They behave like little boys. You know, they jockey for who's on top. You know, they're peacocks. Men are very big peacocks. Woo! So women don't know how to hang on to their personal power. And what I tell people is you have to be careful about what you tell yourself about yourself and others. Okay? What you tell yourself about yourself and others. If you put on your I'm a victim gender glasses, then every single thing anybody does looks like a slight. If you put on, as I tell men, you want to know why we have such a problem? Now, I don't know what it's like in Germany, but I can't imagine it's any different. We have to do middle school. We have to live through 11 and 12 and 13-year-old girls. There is nothing more horrible than the counterpointing and the you're wearing the wrong shoes, and why on earth would I ever speak to you because you're not in the in-group? Guys don't have that same thing going on. We have to survive the fact that we're rejected just for being, okay, in middle school. So I say to people, You must realize that you need a professional identity. Now, young people say to me, I want to be my genuine self. And I just like, really? You've got to be kidding. Like, so who am I now? Am I my genuine self with you now? Am I some fake self? I'm just Karen the guru speaker at the moment. Do you think I act like this when I'm with my grandkids? Does that make any sense to you? Or how about when I'm driving my BMW stick shift rag top, okay? Vroom. We are all many selves. We get to create the self we want to be. What it means to be a professional and to go to work is to have a professional self. And so I will tell you about that professional self. First of all, you are always centered. If you are not centered, you better walk out of the room. You do not cry. If you want to cry, you say, excuse me, let's talk about this a little later. And you go home. If you are angry, you get out of there fast. Because you will never open your mouth when you are angry. Because all you're going to do is blame and accusation. And you're going to look like an unprofessional person. And your credibility is going to drop through the floor. You want to do that? So you got to go home and talk to your supporters until you aren't angry at all. And I mean at all. And you make a plan of what it is you're going to say. You always are centered and professional. If you do something wrong, if you micromanage someone, if you steamroller someone, you owe them amends. Better go say you're sorry. Because that's what a person with power does. If you get a review where it says you have to work on some characteristic, you don't go ballistic and be mad at everyone and say that it's a gender thing. You go to your colleagues and you go, can you please tell me what's going on in my behavior? And you enlist them to help you. And what happens in their eyes? Your worth goes way up because you had enough courage to do that. Now remember, I came out of the second wave women's movement. Everything was a gender issue. And you can see what I'm like, right? I didn't have to learn how to talk, right? It was never my problem. I didn't have to learn how to speak my mind. I didn't need any assertiveness workshops, let me assure you. And so my husband and I, we went to college together, and my professors and others would say, Karen, your behavior is inappropriate. And then we would say, yeah, it's gender, it's this and that, you know. And basically, this is me in my 30s. And finally, I realized something. That when other people talked and said stuff that I didn't like, I rolled my eyes. That I could think faster than lightning and faster than most people. So I was already at the end of the story, and so I stopped listening to them, interrupted, and steamrolled on through. So eventually I looked in the mirror, and I went, Karen, it's not a gender issue. It's a Karen issue. Go grow up. If you never talk and you complain about how no one asks your opinion, it's a personal issue. You have to open your mouth. That is part of the problem. You know who you are. If you talk too much, you talk too much. Better manage it. If you roll your eyes, if you judge everybody, if you're super opinionated, who wants to be around you? That was me. So we have a choice. We can keep blaming everyone, and we can say, what's my part in it? And we can behave professionally all the time. All the time. Do you understand? So while the organizations are getting it straight, we have to get us straight. We have to learn how to maintain personal power and take responsibility for our behavior, no matter what it is. Because if you behave professionally, they will behave professionally. Because really, if they stop behaving professionally and you behave professionally, remember, they're all my little brothers, right? You watch that little brother spinning around. You know. Are you done? Okay, can we talk about the topic now? Do you understand what I'm telling you? You lose your power, You lose your cool, you're in that craziness. Never do it. Don't do it. Now, what we also know is that numbers matter, because if you were not the first child of 6 with 4 brothers, you got to get used to those guys, right? Maybe we need to do like brother experience before women go into technology. And what's interesting is that if we look at this, and this is one of our favorite findings, is that on teams, these are on the overall experience at work. For men and women, if there are more women on the team, their overall experience is better. Not just for women, for everybody. So it behooves us to get more women on the team. We're going to do better if we do that. So what's our target for the person? Grow yourself. Grow your personal power. If we're busy growing our personal power and our professional identity, we're going to do our part while we get the organizations to change practices. Yes? Do you understand what I'm talking about? Because we're talking about retention here. We're not talking about getting them in the door. When you're in the door, you have to live with each other. We're makers. We work nose to nose every day with each other. Doctors aren't, lawyers aren't, business people aren't. They have a concept of team. It's a concept of team with no team in it. Yes? Do you understand what I'm saying? Only our field do you spend 24/7, 60, 80 hours a week having to deal with the psychodynamics of the men and women that you work with. That is exhausting. So sometimes you need to know when to just go home. All right, so this is what the WIT Retention Project is about. Those are your key concepts that we need to work on for retention. And WITOps is my new nonprofit dedicated to exploring this work and bridging academia and community for impact. For impact. So go out, learn about it, and otherwise, thank you very much.